Hello, everybody, and welcome to One Man, One Mic. This is episode 4, and today we have a lot to cover from what happened in the conference championship games in the NFL, the coaching carousel that's going on in the NFL, and what is going to happen with all these quarterbacks that are available. So sit tight, I thank you for joining me, and let's get ready for this ride. So first we're going to talk about the conference championship games that just happened this past week. We had two games that went in very different directions. One that was very close and gathered a lot of media attention, and the other one that seems like one of the teams didn't even have to show up. So we'll start with the one that was less competitive because it's going to be the quicker one to talk about here. The AFC Championship game between the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a game that, in my opinion, displayed just why Patrick Mahomes is the best player in the NFL right now. Because he was dominant in this game from start to finish. It never looked like he was uncomfortable, never looked like he doubted for 1 second that they were going to go in there and win that game. The Bills, on the other hand, were the exact opposite. They were very shaky, the play calling was bad, especially in big moments, and it just seemed like the Bills never had a grasp. Even when they were up 9-0, I don't think anybody was like, well, yeah, this game's over for Kansas City. And I think that the biggest problem for Buffalo in this game was the fact that they never had control of time of possession. And honestly, that's the only way, at least from what I've seen, that you can consistently put up a good fight against Kansas City. Because even when you do win time of possession, if you're not taking advantage of what time you do have, the Chiefs are still going to find a way to score points on you. There's no offense in the NFL that's more explosive. They will put up 28 points on you in one quarter if they have to, because that's just what they do. And the problem with Buffalo in this game, for me, aside from the play calling, which I'll get to here in a second, but the main problem for me was they just did not commit to the run at all, which is expected. Nobody really expected them to come in and run the ball a lot with, Singletary or anybody else on the team, Yeldon or anybody else. But I think that's more of the problem was Kansas City knew coming in defensively, Spagnuolo knew that the Bills were going to come in and throw it all over the yard. And so when they came out and started doing that, it was as to be predicted. The Bills only carried the ball for 11 times and 41 yards for anybody not named Josh Allen. His scrambles equated to 88 yards, which was good for him. But, when you have a quarterback scramble, you're not eating the clock. That's a quick play that usually results in 9 or 10 yards, and it's over like that. It's quicker than a pass. And I think that the fact that they never committed to the run, they never even tried really, is what hurt them. Because when you're up 9-0 this early in the game, you have every opportunity to start eating clock. It's never too early to get in that 4-minute offense against Kansas City. And I think that's what they should have done their very next drive out. They should have just pounded the rock. And, if the team, aside from Josh Allen, 11 for 44, or 41, I'm sorry, is still almost 4 yards a carry. So if you're doing that 3 times, you're getting a first down hypothetically. So I think that was their biggest mistake, was just coming out and throwing the football as much as they did. Josh Allen threw 48 times, and you can't throw the ball 50 times almost against the Chiefs and expect to win unless you are, unless you're in a shootout, and it was never a shootout. This game, like I said, even when they were up 9-0, this game never felt like the Bills had a chance. At least not to me. I'm sure Bills fans held out hope and they really thought they had a fiery start to that game, but at least in my opinion, 9-0, it could have been 16-0. I would have never believed that the Bills, had that game in hand. And that's just because we've watched the Chiefs enough, not only just over the last 2 years, but the Chiefs, in general, under Andy Reid, that team's going to find a way to be in games. That team's going to find a way to win most games that they're in, which is why Andy Reid's one of the greatest head coaches of all time. Because no matter what, he's going to coach up a scheme and an offense that is going to compete, regardless of who's on the other side. And I think that is the challenge for an opposing offense is that they have to compete with that every time. The only way you're going to win is if you can duke it out with the best of them, and the best of them is Kansas City. And, so if Kansas City is going to score 28, you have to be willing to score 42 because they could still find a way to score more. Like, you just know that if you cannot hold Kansas City to, under 30, you're probably not going to win. And not many teams can do that. I mean, hell, I don't think Patrick Mahomes has scored less than 20 points in his entire career in a game that he stayed healthy. Like, this is a team that no matter what, the weapons that they have, the quarterback that they have, and to be honest, one of the most underrated factors of their team, their defense that they have, all this culminated together, they're going to find a way to shut you down. And they're going to find a way to be progressive on their own feet. And, so, I mean, when I looked at Buffalo, I mean, there was a part of me that was rooting for Buffalo because, I mean, it's so brutal to be a Bills fan, especially if you were alive in the 90s and watched what happened. I mean, I could not. I mean, as an Eagles fan, I watched us go through 4 consecutive NFC Championship games, lose 3 of them, and then when we finally did make it to the Super Bowl, I had to watch us lose that game as well. And so I cannot imagine if you actually made it to the big game, made it to the Super Bowl 4 times in a row, and have nothing to show for it. I mean, that's pain that I do not imagine I could compare with. But, so that was part of the reason that I was rooting for the Bills. I mean, Kansas City, because of Andy Reid and because of my Eagles lineage here, there's a part of me that's always going to root for Andy Reid because I always wanted him to succeed even after he left Philadelphia, or after he was fired from Philadelphia, I should say. But, there was a part of me that wanted to see Buffalo do it just because I really thought that if there's any fan base out there that really deserved it, it's Buffalo. And I've seen people say that, the Browns fans have had it the hardest and they're the most deprived fans. Listen, okay, just because most of you might not have been alive, it doesn't mean that what the Browns did before the Super Bowl era doesn't count. The Browns were arguably one of the, if not the best dominant or best football team prior to the Super Bowl, creation, pre-Super Bowl, I should say. And, so the Browns have had success. They have something that they can look back on. They have Jim Brown, arguably the greatest running back of all time. Otto Graham, arguably one of the better quarterbacks of all time. Like, they have things they can look back at. Buffalo, on the other hand, they don't have a bunch of championships they can look back at prior to the Super Bowl. They don't have much championships they can look at after the Super Bowl. The Bills have nothing. They're one of those franchises in sports that doesn't matter how far you look back, there's not success. I mean, it's between them and the Lions who's the most pathetic NFL team. I mean, you could say the Cardinals, but at least the Cardinals have been to a Super Bowl. But, between them and the Lions, I mean, hell, the Lions are a team that has, and I mean, you might not know this before you watch this, but the Lions are a team that has never, in the history of the franchise, they have never had back-to-back 10-win seasons. Just let that sink in. There are teams that, like the Colts in the 2000s and the Patriots from 2001 to 2019, basically. There are teams that average a 10-win season. It's an every year occasion. It's not even a problem. It's not even a thought that they're not going to win 10. Browns fans have never, no matter how old you are, Browns fans have never seen 2 straight 10-win seasons. That is fucking obnoxious to think about. That just shows that they might be the most inconsistent team in NFL history. Like, you cannot, if they have a good season, just know that next year they're not going to be good. And I thought the Falcons were bad with that, but I guess the Lions take the cake because they literally have that to their name that they can't do it. But anyway, get back to the game here. Yeah, I wanted to see Buffalo do it. I wanted to see, deep down, I wanted to see Buffalo pull it off, but there's a part of me that knew that if Mahomes was playing, there was no chance it was going to happen. And I even said that on my previous video that, if Mahomes was playing, they're winning by at least a touchdown. And they won by 2. And as I said, when you come in, you don't have a running game against the Chiefs, it's so hard to beat them. I mean, it is so hard to beat the Chiefs if you don't have a running game. because then it's just a matter of your quarterback versus theirs, your high-powered offense versus theirs, and 9.99% of the times they're going to beat you. But the other thing to talk about in that game would be the obvious, the play calling later in the game. The decision by Sean McDermott to go for two when it wasn't necessary at the time is one that is going to be questioned. Not that it mattered. I mean, they didn't get within one score late in the game to where you could really have that topic. But I think we saw it a couple times in this playoffs. I think going for two early when you don't need to is something that these coaches are thinking. I don't know if they're thinking like they can outsmart the defense by doing it early instead of trying to save it for later. Maybe they don't want the game to come down to one play at the end. Maybe they want it to be a situation where, hey, if we can take care of it early, then all we have to do is kick a field goal. All we have to do is score a touchdown. Whatever that 2-point conversion is going to grant you as far as the score differential. But, you see these guys that are trying to call it earlier and get it out of the way, and ultimately it's hurting their team in the long run, especially in a situation like Buffalo had where you going for it when you did was the difference between a one-possession game and a two-possession game. That difference between 7 and 9 is huge. I mean, it really is. Because now you have to go down and get a touchdown and a field goal, when if you would have just kicked the extra point, you're talking about still being in the game. But, we saw that decision made, and it backfired in the long run, but as I said, it wasn't like Buffalo had the ball in hand at the end of the game and had a chance to tie it. It never happened. But of course, that decision is one that there was a point in time, about midway through the fourth quarter when they were 31-24, I think it was, and it was thought about. It was asked like, hey, why'd they go for two when they did? And at that exact moment in the game, it was relevant, but it never really was. Because as I said from the beginning of this video, it never felt like it was a close game. At least not to me. I could be the only one that saw it that way. But I never thought for 1 second that the Bills were going to go to the Super Bowl. But we can now jump into the second game, the one that was the much better game and also the much more controversial game, which was the NFC Championship game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Green Bay Packers. So, this is a game that, as I said, much closer, 31-26. I guess the score was going to be 31-28 or 28-24, so I was right about there. If you took the over on the 52, like I said, then you probably made out pretty good. But, I guess it was going to be right around that score, and had Green Bay not went for a 2-point conversion that was unnecessary, wink, wink, it would have been 31-28. But, this is a game that never, in my opinion, never felt like it was the opposite of the other game. It never felt like one of these teams had the surefire advantage anywhere between this game. But I will say, the way that it started to feel at the end of that game, especially in that fourth quarter, you started to get that feeling that no matter what Green Bay did, the Bucs and Tom Brady were going to find a way to win this game. And I felt that feeling before as an Eagles fan. I felt it in 2004 for that Super Bowl. And I felt it watching the Patriots in the playoffs many years. And it's one of those things. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's got to be its own feeling that comes over you. But you just know that somehow, no matter what, it's not going to happen for your team. You just know that it's not going to happen. And Brady has a way of doing that to people. But I had that feeling, like, even when it was still, a 3, 4, 5-point game at whatever it was, at one point, when the Packers were still very well in that game, I just knew somehow, it doesn't matter how many interceptions Brady throws here, somehow the Bucs are going to pull this out. And that's part of why Brady's had all the success he has in 20 years, because he's always had complimentary football. Like, if he struggles, the defense plays great. If he's playing great and the defense is struggling, If the defense is struggling, he's playing great, is what I should say. And if he's not playing great and the defense isn't either, you see them rely on the running game. We've seen them run for over 250 yards in an AFC Championship game before as a team. Like, this is a team this is a quarterback that's always had complimentary football on his side, and that is one of the biggest tools you can have. I mean, it really is. And that's what happened here. You saw Brady play lights out in the first half. I mean, you had headlines and commentators and analysts all talking about how Brady was a surefire thing to go back to the Super Bowl. The Packers were playing horrible, and Brady was playing great, and this, that, and Rodgers thrown a pick, and Brady hasn't, and you just heard all of what you would normally hear. And then when the second half came, Brady started getting very careless with the football, in my opinion. The first interception wasn't really his fault, off the hands of somebody, but the next two, I mean, especially that third one, I mean, these just did not look like good passes. The second one was high for Evans, ended up getting picked by Jair Alexander, and then that third one, I don't even know how to explain what the hell he was doing. He was being pressured, he ran backwards, and he just turned around and threw up a prayer. And it was literally just like a fucking arm punch. Like, he just threw it up, and the Packers guy was waiting on it. And I don't know if he was trying to throw it out of bounds, and he just didn't have the arm strength to get it there from where he was on the field. But it was one of those ones that you scratch your head because they just gave the ball away. And but even with all that, even with all the picks and everything and all the opportunities that Green Bay had, I just knew deep down inside it wasn't going to matter because the Brady effect was taking over. You just knew that somehow this guy, I mean, I don't know if he just needs to play the lottery forever. I don't know if he's got luck on his side, which I'm not really a big firm believer in luck in sports. But he's got something, some sort of, aura about him when he's in these situations to where it seems like nothing can go wrong for this guy. If he's not playing well, something's going to happen that's going to make it work. Just like against Seattle in that Super Bowl, Brady didn't play well. He threw a couple picks. Something happened to make it work. The football god said, you know what, Pete Carroll? You're going to pass the ball on the 1 yard line. Even though you shouldn't do it, you're going to do it. And then it happened, and it was just like one of those things, if you're a football fan, you just kind of almost had this like eye roll effect, like, of course that would happen. Of course they would do what they're not supposed to do against the Patriots and give them a Super Bowl. And I'm not complaining as a football fan. It's amazing to see a dynasty like we're seeing with now one team and now one player. But it's just one of those things. It's the Brady effect. Like I said, things happen that wouldn't normally happen when Brady's on the other side of the field. Like, teams make stupid decisions. They make bad passes. They make bad play calls. Like, he doesn't have to do anything but sit on the bench and look like Tom Brady. That same look we've seen in every Super Bowl, in every game that he's down. That look where he's on the bench and he doesn't look necessarily pissed off, but he looks like he's disappointed and thinking very intently like, hey, if I get this ball again, shit's going to happen. And they showed that same exact look in this Packers game. And what happened? The Packers, no matter what, could not score a point. They couldn't do it. And I see all this blame going on Aaron Rodgers and saying, he had all these opportunities, 3 picks, and didn't take advantage of them. Okay, this is true. He should have taken advantage of one of those picks. I'm not going to defend Aaron Rodgers in that right. However, you do have to realize that none of these picks resulted in great field position. All these picks resulted in field position that was deep in Green Bay's own territory. One of them was that Jair Alexander pick. I think he got the ball like the 6 yard line. Like, it's not like Tampa muffed a punt or something in their own territory and Green Bay picked it up and Rodgers didn't take advantage of having, a short field. This was, hey, you're going to have to drive all the way down the field in order to get just 3 points. And once again, not an excuse. And obviously I'm not a Packers fan, so, he should have done this at least once. Once is all he had to do. If he would have done it once, we're not talking about this right now. If he would have done it once, we're talking about Green Bay in the Super Bowl. But that is the point. He couldn't do it once. And I don't know if that was just the defense that Tampa was playing that he just couldn't, find the open guy when it mattered. I don't know if it was just the fact that his offensive line was bad the whole game and it just seemed like he never had time to, really go through his reads and make the right throw. But, either way, there were a lot of opportunities given to the Packers in the second half to win that game, and it just didn't happen. Which is a shame because, honestly, even though Tampa was the better team on that day, it's hard for you to tell me that Green Bay was the best NFC team this year. They were far and away. And honestly, I think it's disappointing that we're going to see a Super Bowl without the Packers because of the fact that I feel like that was the Super Bowl that was supposed to be. But hey, you can't live on what ifs, and Green Bay, they fucked it up for themselves. They didn't do what they had to do. And is that on Rodgers? No. Rodgers did what he had to do. He threw 340 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 pick. He had a much better passer rating and a much better game than Brady did. But it's not a one-man game, and that's why the rings argument comes into effect with a lot of people, including Brady. Brady didn't win 6 rings by himself. Yes, he was a part of 6 teams that won the Super Bowl, but he didn't win 6 rings by himself. And you need games like this in order to win those rings. If it wasn't for the way the defense played for the Bucs in this game, Brady's gone. He's going to Tampa, but he's not going to be going there for the game. And same thing with Super Bowl 53. When they played the Rams and New England played the Rams, that was one of Brady's worst playoff games. And there was no touchdowns. He had a pick, but it didn't matter because the defense stepped up and shut down Jared Goff and the high-powered Sean McVay offense. And that was all that needed to happen. So, not every game is going to be just the quarterback, and that was proven in this game against Green Bay. They won in spite of Brady at the end of the day. The first half, of course, it was Brady, but at the end of the day, it was in spite of what he did. Because if he wasn't throwing interceptions like he was, they would have been in a much better position. But the one thing that obviously is a topic of conversation now after this game is the fact that the officiating was what won the game for Tampa. That bad call at the end of the game. So, let me just say this. Yes, that call was warranted. Yes, he grabbed the undershirt. It was a hold. Yes, the Bucs wide receiver sold it like a fucking NBA player. Yes, he, jumped up and dove and, made it look like he was pushed or grabbed or whatever. He caught the officials' attention with that because you can't tell me the officials saw that undershirt being held for the 2 seconds that it was. But, I think the people that are upset about this aren't upset about the fact that it was called. They were upset about the fact that there was a whole laundry list of things that were not called in that very game. It was, even Troy Aikman and Joe Buck said it throughout the entire game. I guess they're going to let them play this game. I guess they're going to let them play. They pointed out at least 5 or 6 instances of holding and pass interference where, the going rate was, I guess they're just going to let them play. And then when it came to the most crucial moment of the game, the moment that, hey, if this pass is incomplete, Green Bay gets a shot to come back and try to win this thing. And as soon as it came to that moment, of all times, that is when they threw the flag. And I think that is why it has been so talked about and so controversial this week, is because it does, you can see why people would feel like that is very, what's the word I'm looking for? That's very, picky and choosy. It's very, playing favorites. It's favoritism, essentially. We're not going to call all these times that Devontae Adams is held or, Tunyon was held or whatever, but we're going to call at the very end of the game when it matters the most. And, if this went the other way around, you'd be hearing it from the Bucs fans. But because it happened in favor of the Bucs, because it happened in favor of Brady, this is why it's a big deal. Because now it's, the refs and Brady, they had to help him out. They had to do this and that. Brady, just couldn't win it by himself. Well, as I just got done saying, this call isn't what killed the game for Green Bay. It is Green Bay that killed the game for Green Bay. You have got to take advantage of every opportunity you can get in the playoffs. And, yes, even though I said they started with bad field position, if you start on your own 15-yard line, dude, you got to go 85 yards. Or you got to go at least 60 or whatever it is to get in field goal range. Like, you have to take advantage of it. You cannot have wasted possessions in the playoffs. It's losing football. And that's exactly what Green Bay had. I mean, you can look at their play-by-play, look at their drive list, and it's empty possession, empty possession, empty possession. And you can't have all that, especially against a guy like Tom Brady on the other side, because he's going to take advantage of whatever possessions he gets. And if you don't do the same on your side, it's not going to end up good for your team. But yeah, the call itself is not what sparks the controversy. It was just the inconsistency of the calls. And that's a going thing with NFL officials, is every time any kind of call is, either introduced, or any time that it's, singled out in a game or a series of games, it's not ever the call in particular. It's the inconsistency of the calls. And this goes back to the catch rule, back when they had all the drops and all the Des Cottet situation. These were things where in one situation, the guy would catch it and hit the floor and the ball would pop up. They'd rule it a touchdown, and then they didn't have enough evidence to overturn it. It stays a touchdown. And then you'd have the very next week, you'd have a situation that's almost identical, and you would see the opposite. You would see that, suddenly, that is not a catch now. And it was very ticky-tacky as well, just like the call that was in this game. And that was the biggest problem when it came to those no-catch calls, is that it wasn't really a matter of whether it was a catch. It was just nobody knew what the definition of a catch was. And it almost came down to which officiating crew you got on game day. Like, Blandino's crew might rule it a catch, but over here, the Hockey League crew might not. And it was incredibly frustrating because it just never had a consistency. Nobody knew, whether they could trust it. And inevitably, after a long, way too long process of that, they changed it. And even now today, it's so tough to rule a catch. Oh, well, he had 3 steps and he made a football move. It was a catch. But then there's other ones you see where, the guy catches it and takes a step and a half and turns and gets hit and they rule it a fumble. And it's just like, okay, well, why is that a fumble? He didn't take 3 steps. And they have, so many, it's almost like baseball with the unwritten rules now in officiating for the NFL. It's like, okay, well, yeah, this was technically ruled as, a football move, so that counts as a fumble. And, so we're still dealing with that to this day, and there's still inconsistency with that to this day. And then obviously you go back to last year with which was the most egregious officiating thing, in which has happened at least in my lifetime, and that was the pass interference review. And it was just, the whole thing was a mess. The idea of it was good. The thought that, in a crucial moment of a game, on one of the biggest plays, because, pass interference is something to where if it's the end of the game and if I'm about to get beat, this could be the game, that defender knows, he's taught, I'm going to grab this guy, and I'm going to pull on him, I'm going to tackle him if I have to save a touchdown, because I'd rather get a 45-yard penalty than allow a 65-yard touchdown and lose the game. And, pass interference has shown itself to be such an important and game-changing decision and a game-changing call in many years, in a lot of recent years. And, so they finally put in the option to do something about it. It was the first penalty that was really reviewable, and they botched it. Last year was such a disaster, and it was not once again, it was not the call itself. It was the execution of it. It was the consistency of it. Because you would have one play that everybody in the world and their mother would look at it and say, that was pass interference, no question about it. And they would call it no PI on the field. It would get challenged, and they would stick with their judgment and say, nope, it wasn't PI. And then it was the same thing on the other side. They would call it PI on the field, you would challenge it, and they would stick with their judgment as well and say, yeah, that was pass interference. Even if it really wasn't, they still ruled it as pass interference. And, there's been lots of different stories on why it was such a bad execution last year, from, the head of officiating being the problem to the overall process being a problem. But ultimately, that's just another example of the consistency of the officiating was the problem, not the actual calls themselves that were being made. And, that was just the most recent example. And, going forward, there are so many things they can still improve on officiating, just like there's so many things they can improve on with every aspect of the game. But officiating, one of the things I would like to see personally in officiating is the ability to change or add a penalty to a play once you've reviewed that play. Because it just doesn't make sense to me that you can't. If you're looking for a spot foul, or somebody's challenging the spot of the ball, and while you're watching this play, you see, number 77 was holding on this play. That official should be able to go back and say, the ruling on the field stands. However, holding number 77 on the offense, 10-yard penalty, repeat, second down. I don't know why these things cannot be changed in officiating. Like, yes, you screwed it up the first time. You missed these calls. Now you have a chance to go back and fix them. In holding, not as big a deal, but there's some other times where you'll see like a defensive holding, and they'll be like, oh, well, they missed that one. If you're already reviewing the play for some reason, whether it's a scoring play or turnover, if you're already reviewing the play, there's no reason, in my opinion, that if you see a penalty happen, like if you see an interception and the wide receiver was held prior to the interception, you are already reviewing this play. You're already going through that because all turnovers are automatic reviews. So why is it that it's not within the power of the referees to say, yeah, you know what, after reviewing the play, it stands or whatever. However, there was holding on defender, insert number here, so that's going to be automatic first down on the offense. And, I think that this would make the fans and players believe more in the referee system, and B, I think it's just better for the integrity of the game, because that way it's not like this what if. You're not this name game of blaming things and saying, oh, well, if only they hit this call, if only they didn't miss this one, this goes away. Because then if you see these things, you can do something about it. And I'm not saying that coaches should have the ability to challenge these things. No, that shouldn't be. The pace of the game should be way too slow. You'll have 5-hour games because coaches are going to want to challenge every holding flag. But I think if in a situation in which you are already reviewing the play, so you've already stopped the game, you've already taken the time to review it, you're already looking at this, and this. If you see a penalty off in the distance, maybe you could even boil it down to say you only reverse it or only add these penalties if they were directly in effect with that play. If it's a block in the back on the other side of the field, then don't worry about it. But, as I said earlier, if it's a situation where it was an interception and the player, the intended wide receiver was held shortly prior to that interception, then yes, I believe that holding call should be called, because it was in direct correlation with how that ball was picked, because that receiver was slowed, that receiver wasn't able to cut when he wanted to, that receiver's route was interrupted. And I believe that would be a situation where you would have it within your rights as a referee to say, holding on the defense, insert number here, because you are directly affecting the game in that regard. And you are, as I said, you're saving, in my opinion, the integrity of the game, and you're getting the fans and the NFL staff and the players and the coaches, you're getting them on the referee's side. Because right now, referees are public enemy number one when it comes to games. Because you just don't want to see refs ruin a game. Which is why in the playoffs, most of the time, you'll see refs really back off, like they did for the most part in that Bucs-Packers game. But it was the one time that the refs did step up, which is why it caused such a mess, because people didn't want to see it after they hadn't seen it all game. If you're going to call a game where you're going to call everything, then do it. But if you're going to call a game where you don't call anything, then do it. You can't have it both ways. You can't not call this, but call this. You can't not call this, but call that. You just can't do it because you're going to lose all integrity in your officiating staff. Nobody's going to care. And it's going to be held against you for the remainder of your referee career. Like, there are guys that still, to this day, as referees, whether they're retired or they're still doing it, people remember, oh, you're the guy who missed that call. You're the guy that was refereeing the Des Connet play, and you fucked it up. And that's something that carries with you. And things like that are blemishes on the officiating in the NFL that, it doesn't need anymore. They're already hated by everybody. There's already conspiracies every year about how it's rigged and they're being paid off like the NBA was. And, if you give them more ammo by taking away things like the PI review and by not allowing them to just add in penalties they might see on a review, I think that it only hurts them. And I think if you do add in things like what I said, it will help the officiating in the long run. It will help teams and players want to be more on the side of the referees. Because as of right now, the referees don't have any friends out there. Okay, so the third topic I want to talk about today is the NFL's coaching carousel that we had. And this is going to be kind of a deep topic here because, in my opinion, it is not good not good for the game the way that this all worked out. So we had 7 NFL head coaching vacancies this offseason. They've already been filled. We're before the Super Bowl, and they've already been filled, which is fine. You want to fill your spot before then. You want your guy to get in and start doing the scouting and all that right away. So it makes sense to hire him now. The problem here is last year, I believe it was last year, so somebody can correct me if it wasn't, but I believe it was this past offseason, the NFL came out and said that they really want to implore more equality and more minority coaches in the NFL. And, that goes for, Muslims, that goes for blacks, that goes for Asians, whatever. They just don't, they want to be more inclusive, which makes sense. It should be that way. And, so the problem with this is we have 7 head coaching vacancies that came out this year. They've all been filled. There are no black head coaches that got a job. And it's not good because of the fact that it's a situation where a lot of these guys, you don't even know their name. I follow football very closely. Even I follow teams that I don't watch. I follow teams that I don't, root for, because as a football fan in general, I like to be knowledgeable about the game. So that's why I'll know, hey, the Packers fucking center is Lindsley, or I'll know, hey, the fucking Bengals kicker is Fat Randy. Like, I know things that most people aren't going to know off the top of their head because I am a student of the game and I like to be knowledgeable. But there's a couple of these guys that were hired that I don't fucking know who they are myself. And that's not a good look when you're hiring. I'm not going to say it's not a good look to hire white coaches. There's nothing wrong with hiring white coaches. But it's not a good look to hire white coaches that don't have a huge resume and, let's say, don't seem that qualified, when there are several minority and several black coaches that have qualification lists down the street that are super overlooked without any explanation. The main one we can talk about in the last 2 years has been Eric Bieniemy. I mean, the Chiefs have had by far and away the number one offense in the league the last 2 years. I mean, obviously Andy Reid is a big part of this as well, but you saw Peterson get a head coach job. You saw Nagy get a head coach job. It's just something that comes out of Andy Reid. These coaches go and they have mild success. Peterson had a Super Bowl run, and then a couple playoff one and dones basically, and then now he's gone. Nagy had a good year his first year. Now he's looking like he's going to be going out the door probably the end of next year if he doesn't have a good run. And Bieniemy, there's no reason not to be given a job at this point. There were 7 openings last year. He didn't get a single one. Everybody scratched their head why. 7 openings this year. Didn't get a single one. And everybody's scratching their head why again. And there's no good reason. The NFL is doing everything they can to be inclusive. They're even offering draft picks, saying you can get an extra third-round draft pick if you hire minority coaches, if you hire more inclusive coaches. And you have a head coach candidate that is qualified. He knows how to run an offense. He's worked with some of the best players in the game. You're not going to hire him. All you have to do is hire a guy that's qualified, so he's going to be more than likely a solid coach. He's coming from one of the most successful coaching trees that there is with Andy Reid, and you're getting a free third-round pick just for hiring the guy. So why are you not going to do it? And maybe you don't like Eric Bieniemy. Maybe you don't think that he's, the fact that he hasn't been a head coach concerns you. Okay, we'll say that's fair. So here's a couple other guys that were doing some interviews. You have Jim Caldwell. If you don't remember Jim Caldwell, he was the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts after Tony Dungy retired. First year as a head coach, he took the Colts to the Super Bowl. He was also the last head coach of the Lions to have a winning season. He went 9-7 back-to-back years and then got fired. Because, Lions. If you take out the season in which Peyton Manning got hurt with his neck injury, and they had Curtis Painter and Jim Sorgi for most of the season, if you take out that year, Jim Caldwell has a 62% winning percentage as a head coach. You can't ask for more. I mean, that's a 10-win season right there. He's basically averages a 10-win season as a head coach. And you can't tell me out of Jacksonville and Detroit and LA and Philadelphia and fucking New York, you can't tell me all these teams wouldn't kill to have a 10-win season. But for whatever reason, they didn't look at Jim Caldwell. Or they did look at him, they interviewed him, and didn't consider that he was good enough to be their head coach. So they chose white guy Bob over here. And once again, there's not a problem with white coaches. It's just when you have more qualified minority coaches, there's no reason not to hire them. Especially when, like I said, you're being thrown in a free draft pick. You're being encouraged to be inclusive. And you're choosing not to be. You're choosing not to choose the more qualified coach with the free draft pick that comes along with him. For what reason? Is it out of spite? Are you just trying to prove something in the NFL that you can try to be inclusive all you want, but we're stuck in our ways? Like, I literally don't understand what the mentality is behind some of these teams and the decisions they're making when it comes to these coaches. And okay, so maybe you don't like Jim Caldwell. Maybe you're the type of guy that says most of his success was just the fact that he had Peyton Manning. Fair enough. Okay, you want to go that route? We'll go that route. Marvin Lewis, another head coach that was available. Another head coach that did a couple interviews. Yeah, Marvin Lewis might have never won a playoff game, but he has 7 playoff berths. If you once again look at this list, Jacksonville, Detroit, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, New York, Houston, Atlanta, 7 playoff berths for most of those teams right there. They can't say they've had 7 playoff berths in the last 15 years. I mean, out of these teams, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and maybe Los Angeles might have 7. The rest of them would kill to have 7 playoff berths. And, Marvin Lewis also has over 100 career wins. None of these teams can say that. None of these head coaches they just hired can say that. Marvin Lewis might not have a Super Bowl ring. He might not have a playoff win, but he's still a more qualified coach than, say, Dan Campbell. Or than, say, Arthur Smith. Or than, say, Nick Sirianni. And I'm optimistic about Sirianni and the Eagles, to be honest. But that's still against my point. I lobbied hard to get Jim Caldwell. I lobbied hard to get Jim Caldwell in Michigan over Jim Harbaugh. Because I think Jim Caldwell is a winning coach. I think he knows how to lead a team. I think he's a good offensive-minded coach. And from everything I've heard from former Colts players and whatnot, it seems like he's a player's coach. He's very about the team and about the chemistry of the offense and the chemistry of the locker room. And that's something that a lot of these teams could use, especially teams like Atlanta, where you just had Dan Quinn in there, and that was a mess, especially a team like Houston, where, your franchise quarterback wants out, you have no draft picks, you traded away all the players that are important in the last couple of years. Like, that's a team that could really use somebody that can go in there and band everything together and try to, get everybody on the right foot again. But once again, Houston is going to go hire the Ravens offensive coordinator, not even offensive coordinator, I think he was the quarterback's coach. You're going to hire the Baltimore Ravens quarterback coach? How many times does Lamar Jackson even throw the football? This dude throws it, 18 times a game? How do you get qualified for that? I'm going to go hire Jimmy Garoppolo as quarterback coach because they run the ball 30 times a game, but he's probably a good hire. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And especially when, once again, Bieniemy, Caldwell, Marvin Lewis, you have guys that are much, much more qualified that are being chosen over from somebody else. And I would like to see the ownership or the general manager, whoever makes that call for Houston, I'd like to see them sit in front of a camera and look you right in the eye and say, we believe this guy was more qualified than Jim Caldwell. Because he's one I heard multiple times. I heard his name come up for that Houston job. And I would love to see why they came to the conclusion that this guy was better. It just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. And then, you got Leslie Frazier as well. He was up there. Todd Bowles, who, yes, Todd Bowles had struggles in New York. He didn't work out for the Jets, but obviously he knows what he's doing. This Bucs defense has looked great this year, and they even looked great at the end of last year. But Todd Bowles, obviously, is not going to get a job. And then the last one I'm going to talk about, which might be the one that maybe is the biggest stretch for a head coaching job, would be Raheem Morris. Yeah, Raheem Morris had his shot with Tampa back after Gruden got fired. It was a 3-year stint, I think. It didn't work out very well, and he's found coordinator jobs and different kind of position group jobs since then. But Raheem Morris came in this year, and that Atlanta team looked different overnight. They won their first game with him. They lost the second game by 1 point, and then they won 2 more games after that. He went 5-7 as a head coach this year, and 5 of his 7 losses were by a total of 16 points combined. So the Falcons were losing close games. They went from getting, all that bad luck at the beginning of the year, the Dan Quinn curse, to they were losing games, but it didn't feel like they were losing nearly as bad as they were prior. Even in the games they lost against, Dallas and, the blown comebacks and shit like that, it didn't feel like that team was as good as the team that was coached by Raheem. At least that's in my opinion. And but unfortunately, Raheem once again not looked at for head coaching jobs. Could he do a better job than most of these guys? Maybe, maybe not. But it's just the idea that you have 6 qualified minority black head coaches that I just named that very well could have been hired for any of these jobs, and probably should have been hired for at least 2 of these jobs, and they were not chosen. And it's not a good look for the NFL. And me being who I am, being a white dude, I don't really have the voice that I can say that, But I think it's going to be something that eventually somebody of color, somebody of power will come out and say it, and it's not going to be pretty for the NFL. It's not going to be good. Not going to be a good PR look, because especially the travesty that's going on with Eric Bieniemy. There's no reason this guy shouldn't have a job. You got quarterback coaches and wide receivers getting head coach jobs, and this guy has been the offensive coordinator for the best offense in football, bar none, the last 2 years, and he's not getting a job. And it's ridiculous. And for some of these teams, the way that I look at it as a white dude, you can't tell me that when I see it through my lens, it looks like it's literally black and white. It's choosing, we're not going to hire him because he's black. And I don't want to say that that's how it is in the world today, but I find it so hard to think there's another reason. Like, I find it damn near impossible with some of these situations to see that there's another good reason that he's not been hired. And I even heard college, he's got like one offer, I think it was Colorado State, to be the head coach. So not only can he not get a head coach job in the NFL, he could barely get a head coach job in the NCAA. So either there's something behind the scenes going on with Eric Bieniemy that nobody knows about, that these academic programs and these NFL franchises are concerned about, or it's just he's just being blackballed, and I don't think he deserves that. I mean, obviously I don't know him, but it seems like that's a situation that is definitely twisted, and it's going to be interesting to see when it comes to light. Now, well, the last talking point I have for the video is going to be the NFL's quarterback carousel. So we're going to play a game here. So I've taken the 18 quarterbacks that Adam Schefter recently listed as uncertain futures for these 18 quarterbacks, and I'm going to give my picks on where I think these quarterbacks are going to go next season and where they'll be. And I'm not really going to go into what's going to happen with their teams unless one of these is a plug-and-play situation on this list. I'm not going to go into that. I'm not going to go into the draft and what's going to happen with all that. I'm just going to go into the hypotheticals of 18 quarterbacks and where they could be next year. So I'm going to do his list in reverse from bottom to top because I feel like it's more, anticipating that way. So we'll start with the bottom. Ben Roethlisberger. Now, I already did a video about Ben and how I think the best thing for the franchise would be to let him go. But the bottom line is, Pittsburgh likes Ben. They're not ready to let him go. Tomlin's still there. I don't think Tomlin's ready to let him go. And they still owe Ben a shit ton of money next year. So all signs point to the fact that unless he decides he's giving it up himself, which from what I know, I think he just came out and said he's ready for next year. All signs point to the fact that Ben Roethlisberger is coming back next year, so that would be my money on Big Ben staying in Pittsburgh. The next one on the list is Alex Smith. Now, if I was a doctor, I would say it's probably best to hang it up, Alex. However, I mean, he was successful this year. He went 5-1 as a starter. And it's hard to argue with that. I mean, that's what Alex Smith's been his whole career. I mean, after his first 4 or 5 years in San Francisco. But basically since then, his last few years in San Francisco and his whole time in Kansas City, I mean, he's been a winner. He finds ways to win games. He's efficient. He doesn't turn the ball over a lot. He wins games. And I think that, if he can move, if he can get himself fully healthy, another offseason, another year of healing, I mean, if he wants to come back, that's a guy that I think could still very well be a top 10, 15 quarterback in the league. But I wouldn't advise it. I don't think he should. But I'm going to go with my gut here and say that I think he will come back. And I think because of the money that Washington owes him, I think he'll be in Washington next year. But I do not think he will be the starter week 1. I think that Washington will go seek other options for quarterbacks. I'm not sure. None of these quarterbacks on the list I have filled in that spot. But I think Washington will find another quarterback, whether that's through draft or whether that's through, free agency, or maybe they'll stick with Kyle Allen. I think they'll go with another quarterback, and I think that Smith will be number 2 on the depth chart, and it's going to be a situation like this year where if that guy gets hurt or that guy's struggling, we have a veteran that can come in and take over. So number 3 is the journeyman himself, Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I think that Ryan Fitzpatrick is a quarterback that he's maybe the biggest anomaly out there, because he continues to get jobs, but he continues to post statistics that are very mediocre. The thing with Ryan Fitzpatrick is he finds ways to play good when it matters. He can play bad the entire first 3 quarters and throw 4 interceptions, but he'll find a way to throw 4 touchdowns in the 4th quarter and keep you alive. And as of right now, at least to this point in his career, that's the one thing that Tua has not shown, is that he can take over a game in the 4th quarter. So with that being said, I think that Fitzpatrick will stay in Miami as a backup, and I think that that's going to be his role until Flores believes that Tua can fill that 4th quarter void. But I think next year we could see the same situation. I think we could see Fitzpatrick coming in late in games if Tua can't do it. And, maybe that's not ideal for Fitzpatrick. It's definitely not going to be ideal for Tua. But if that's what they have to do to find ways to win games, then, hey, man, that's what Ryan Fitzpatrick does. So, 4th quarterback on the list is Jameis Winston. And this one is interesting. And to be entirely honest, I think Jameis Winston will remain in New Orleans, and I think he will be their week 1 starter. And I think he should be. I think from what we've seen, Taysom Hill is not a starting quarterback in the NFL. He's not a good enough thrower of the football. He is built to be what he is used as. He's a Swiss Army knife of a player. He's a utility guy. He can line up as a tight end. He can line up as a wide receiver. You can line him up as a running back or a wildcat quarterback. He fits that role good. He has his own position in that regard. But he's not meant to be a every down quarterback. He had 1 game this year in his 5, I think he started, that he looked solid. I think that was the first Atlanta game. I think he had like 280 yards or something, 300 yards. And that was a game that everybody looked at and said, okay, maybe this guy can throw it. But every other game, he looked incredibly mediocre at the quarterback position. And, I don't know how, if you're Sean Payton, you could look at what he did and say that you're confident with him being a starter in the NFL. Winston's guy has problems. He threw more interceptions than fucking pass completions in some games, it felt like. But, a year out of Bruce Arians' system, a year as out of the spotlight as a starter, maybe he's taking some humble pie. And maybe next year, if he's given that opportunity, maybe they sign him to another 1-year deal or maybe a 2-year deal. Next year, if he's given that opportunity, I think he could shine. And I think he has the opportunity in a Sean Payton offense, who's a very quarterback-friendly offense. I think he has the opportunity to be good and to lead New Orleans to the playoffs. Because if anything's been proven in the last few years, Drew Brees being hurt, they don't miss a step on offense. They know how to win games. They know how to build game plans that benefit the quarterback that's in the game, regardless of who it is. But, and plus the other factor that goes into that with me is the Saints are going to be in cap room hell this offseason. They're like negative $68 million in the cap as of right now, if it stays lowered where the people are expecting it to. And in that regard, you can't go out and sign a guy. You can't bring in, a quarterback for $30 million. You're not going to have the cap space to do it. So Jameis Winston, I could see them re-signing him to another deal. Maybe not a $1 million deal, but something minuscule. kind of like a prove it deal, and letting him go out there and do just that. Let him go out there and see if he can prove it, and then, in 2022, when the cap, stabilizes more, hopefully, fingers crossed, that's when they could say, okay, we're going to commit to you now. So the next one on the list is Mitch Trubisky. So, first things first, Trubisky's gone from Chicago. I don't see any way in which he comes back to the Bears. They've clearly shown that they're not confident in him. They've clearly shown with the Nick Foles signing and benching Trubisky, they've clearly shown that they do not believe that he is the guy for the future. However, I do think he will still find a job somewhere, but not as a starter. And I think he'll go to the exact place I was just talking about. I think he will go back up Jameis Winston. And I think he'll be in New Orleans. And this goes back to my point about Taysom Hill. I don't think Sean Payton, and I don't think this offense and this team should have confidence in Taysom Hill. I think Sean Payton needs to keep Taysom Hill where he's at in this role that he plays, and you need to have another real life quarterback behind Jameis Winston. That way, if Winston goes down, if Winston's play slips up, if Winston struggles, you can bring in another guy and let him run the offense efficiently. And as I just mentioned, with the Saints cap situation, they're not going to be able to get a big guy. So I think getting Winston and Trubisky, those are two quarterbacks that are not high names right now. Two quarterbacks that you're going to get cheap because they are coming from rough times. And I think that would be the perfect power punch for the Saints to go into 2021 with. And then after that, if they can get the cap stabilized, they can make their decisions then what to do with Winston and Trubisky. But I think that's where Trubisky will go. And plus, there's a lot of comparisons to Trubisky's play to Drew Brees, and I think that that is going to benefit him as well because he's sliding into a system that was built for that same style of quarterback. So the next one on the list is Teddy Bridgewater. And I'm not really sure why Adam Schefter put this one on the list. I don't see Teddy going anywhere. The Panthers were not a great team this year, but by no stretch of the imagination do I think Teddy Bridgewater did a bad job. And, they just signed this guy to a 3-year deal, I think. 3 years, $60 million, I think it was. And I just don't see how you can warrant or justify getting rid of Teddy Bridgewater at this point. If the Panthers see somebody they like in the draft, then maybe they can take a shot on somebody. But even if you take somebody in the draft, I don't see any reason that you would have to throw them to the wolves and start them right away. Teddy Bridgewater is the perfect plug-and-play quarterback that you can put a guy behind, and Bridgewater will still run the offense. He'll still get you a 9-win season probably, and give that rookie time to sit. And that's where I think Carolina could pick a guy like Trey Lance, a quarterback that's probably not going to be built to be a day one starter. And, let him sit behind Bridgewater for a year. And then in Bridgewater's contract year, you can make that decision based on his 2 years of play, whether or not it's time to keep him or not. So the next one on the list is Cam Newton. Honestly, I think it's going to be tough for Cam to find a job. I mean, he just displayed one of the worst quarterback seasons we've seen in a long time. 6 touchdowns. I think he threw 11 picks. It was ugly in every stretch of the imagination. And I definitely think New England's done with him. And I would say you're going to be hard pressed to find any team that's going to take him legitimate as a quarterback. And so with that being said, I think that him being a starter is ruled out. I don't think any team, any of the 32 is going to take that happening. Even Ron Rivera, I've heard his name pop up in Washington again. Ron Rivera's got to see. He had Cam for his last couple of years in Carolina. He just watched what happened in New England. Ron seems like a smart guy. I would assume that he's not going to look at Cam and think that there's something there. So I'm not leaving anybody on this list as just a free agent or anything. I'm going to try to find a home for all of them. So with that being said, The only place I found that I could think Cam Newton might make a fit for is in Baltimore. I think, with his mobility, you can put him in Greg Roman's offense to back up Lamar Jackson. And I think, with Lamar, his style of play, if Lamar misses some time, if he gets hurt, if he has to take a shit at halftime, I think you can put Cam in and he could, move the offense. He doesn't have to be a full-time starter, but I think he could come in for a drive or two or, a couple games if there's an injury, and I think the offense could still flow with Cam in there. So the next one is Jimmy Garoppolo. So I had a lot of back and forth with this one because Jimmy has very mediocre stats since he got to San Francisco, especially these last 2 years. And it makes you really think like whether or not he's a franchise quarterback or not. And there was a big part of me that thought that, he'd probably stay and Shanahan would probably keep him there. But after a lot of going back and forth, there's another quarterback that is looking for a home who's much more high profile, and I think that guy will be coming to San Francisco. So, a little bit of a spoiler alert for the end of the list here, but I think Deshaun Watson will be coming to San Francisco. And I think that this will happen because obviously we are in an NFL now where whether or not people want to admit it, these quarterbacks, these players, they control their own fate. And it's unprecedented times for that. It used to be, if we want to trade you, we're going to trade you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But now, now these players have a voice. Now they have social media. Now they have so many platforms to voice their not dishappiness, it's not a word, but voice their unhappiness and their, disarray and all this and get it out there into the world. And obviously, Deshaun Watson has been not subtle about that over the last few weeks and the last few months. And I think that San Francisco is a team that would fit him perfectly because I think they are one team that is built to have a quarterback come in and just play ball. And, San Francisco has one of the best wide receiving cores, one of the best option, performance players, basically, of anybody. I mean, he's got Brandon Ayuk, he's got Deebo Samuel, he's got George Kittle when he's healthy. I mean, Dante Pettis is not a bad fourth-string wide receiver. He had a good year a couple years ago when they had everybody injured. They have a good enough core of these big time players, these big time positions, that I think if you put Deshaun Watson in that offense, he would thrive. I mean, I think he would absolutely thrive. And then behind that, you have a running game, something he hasn't had in Houston either since he's been there. I mean, you have Raheem Mostert, who is, Olympic sprinter fast. He's had some injury issues, but, I mean, he's been very reliable for them. And, if they can keep Mostert healthy and they can keep these receivers healthy, which, I mean, these are all big what ifs. But I think, if they can get that all together and they can be healthy, plus you have a head coach like Kyle Shanahan, I mean, it's a match made in heaven. And I just don't, the Jets have issues. They don't have weapons. They don't have, they don't have anything appealing in New York for him to go except for the fact that it's New York. But this is L.A., so basically L.A. I think that out of all the destinations that could possibly be looking for Deshaun Watson, if he has any say-so whatsoever for where he goes, that's where you're going to want to go. And I don't think Houston would be opposed to it because he's going to the other conference. You're not going to have to play this guy, every year. You're not going to have to play him in the playoffs. I think that would be smart for both parties to send him to San Francisco. Now, that being said, to get back to Jimmy G, I think the reason that Garoppolo won't be in San Francisco, obviously, is Watson, and I think that he will go to Houston as part of this trade. One of the main reasons is Houston needs a winner, and as mediocre as Jimmy Garoppolo's statistics might be, he finds ways to win games. And I mean, obviously, I think that there will be a lot more in this trade than just a straight up quarterback for quarterback. I think there's going to be some first round picks. I think you're going to see some second round picks. Maybe you might see some future picks. 3 years down the line, and you might see another player. I mean, it's going to be a blockbuster trade of all blockbuster trades. But I think Jimmy Garoppolo's market, his value right now is so low that you could, if you wanted to, as Houston, you can sneak that in right now and say we want to take him, and then that's a guy that he would be going into his contract year, I think, this coming year. So that's a guy that he's a 1 year experiment. If he doesn't work out in Houston, draft a guy the next year. You're gonna have 14 fucking draft picks to do it with. And so yeah, I think Watson will be in San Francisco, and I think he'll be in Houston. And then we go to the Rams. These next two are going to be quick. They have the Rams and the Eagles with Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. I think neither one of them is going anywhere. One, they're both locked down on huge contracts, so it's going to be way too much hassle for both of these teams to try to offload those guys. And two, I mean, Goff is in McVay's system. Could they benefit having a more explosive quarterback? Obviously. But, this is a system that's more built around running the football anyway. So Goff is the type of quarterback, whether they like it or not, he's the prototypical type of quarterback they need in that offense. And then Wentz, this is the first time he's going to play in an offense that isn't called by Doug Peterson. And obviously him and Doug didn't have a stellar relationship. And I think it's a fair thing for the Eagles to give him a shot outside of Doug and see just what kind of quarterback he is. I think letting him have that year with Sirianni, who just came from the Colts, and Phillip Rivers, and Sirianni had Phillip Rivers, Jacoby Brissett, and Andrew Luck over the last 3 years, so he's coached some guys to success. And I think that no matter what kind of fodder they want to put out there for this offseason, I don't think it makes any logical sense for the Eagles to move Wentz right now. I think you give him a year, and then if it's the same situation next year and he's struggling, then we have that conversation. But I think both him and Goff are staying put. And then we go to Sam Darnold. Now, Sam Darnold's an interesting case because I think with Darnold, everything is dependent on whether or not they draft a quarterback with their picks. They have their first pick is, I think, pick number 2. And I've heard so many different mock drafts and stuff. I mean, every mock draft you see is a different position. They got them drafting offensive tackle, they got them drafting wide receiver, they got them drafting running back, a quarterback. So, first things first, people that do mock drafts don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But yes, the Jets need a wide receiver, but I would be shocked if the Jets don't take a quarterback at number 2. I mean, yes, Darnold has had some injury issues. Yes, he's had some, struggles with certain key positions on the offense. He hasn't had a reliable running back behind him that's under the age of 35. He's had issues. But when he's been out there, he has not looked good on any stretch of the imagination. He's thrown more interceptions than games started. He's had weapons at his disposal that have succeeded outside of him. Guys like Robbie Anderson, who just went to Carolina and had a career year and led the league in receiving yards, I want to say. Maybe touchdowns, one of the two. But, he led the league in one of those categories and had a hell of a tandem there with DJ Moore. I think it was DJ Moore. Might have been Curtis Samuel. Correct me, somebody. But, Robbie Anderson just proved that, outside of the Jets and outside of Sam Darnold, he can be successful. And that's why I think if you keep Darnold in there and you draft like Devontae Smith or Jamar Chase, I think you're going to end up regretting it, because it doesn't matter who's at wide receiver. If the guy throwing the ball is not the right guy, it's going to be a hard time. So I don't think Darnold's going to stay in New York. And so I was thinking about all the places that he can go. as a backup. Because once again, this is the Trubisky situation. I don't see Darnold being a starter in the NFL next year. So I looked across the whole NFL and tried to kind of, decide where I think he would fit in as a backup. And I'm thinking of a situation kind of like the Marcus Mariota situation in Las Vegas. Somewhere that he's a backup, but if something happened, he could be slid in as a starter. Whether that's an injury, whether that's poor quarterback play, he would get another chance. Kind of like Tannehill had in Tennessee when Mariota was still there. So with all that being said, I came to the conclusion that I think he could go somewhere like Minnesota. Backup Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has been wildly inconsistent basically his entire career. And, I don't see them moving from Kirk Cousins. That's why I don't think he'll be a starter there. They just, re-upped his contract, I think, last year or the year before. So Cousins is in it until, 2023, I think. But I think that, they only have Sean Mannion as a backup there, and I think that they could use a quarterback behind Cousins that has a little bit of merit to his name, and that if anything did happen, if Cousins had one of those games where he throws 4 interceptions, or if he had an injury or something, they could bring a guy in and say, this guy should be able to run the offense. And then we're going to go to another big name along the lines of what Watson would be. We have Dak Prescott out in Dallas. Now, this is a situation just like the Carson Wentz situation. It makes for great media to speculate, Prescott going places. But the fact of the matter is, I think he's going to stay in Dallas. That's just bottom line. That's just a simple answer here. I think he will be franchise tagged again. And I think that Dallas is going to put him in the same situation he had last year. They're going to make him earn it. And maybe that's not fair to him in some people's eyes, but I think Dallas doesn't want to be in the situation that the Rams and the Eagles are in right now. Because a lot of people's opinion is that they paid Wentz and Goff too early. And that, once they paid them, their play started to decline, and now they're stuck with them. And I think that that's the one area that the Cowboys, it's a gift and a curse. They're hurting themselves by not re-signing Dak because they might lose him for it. But at the same time, they're trying to save their own ass because if they do re-sign him and then all of a sudden Dak starts plummeting, a la Ezekiel Elliott, if Dak starts really struggling, they're stuck with this guy. And the type of money that's been discussed about Dak, he's looking at being arguably the second highest paid player in the NFL. You don't want to be stuck with that contract if you're Dallas, because that's going to ruin your entire future of team building. So I think he'll stay in Dallas. I think he'll get franchise tagged again. And I think we'll be having the same conversation next year about whether he's going to stay there or not. And, whether his ankle's healthy, how his play is when he comes back, all those things will be factors into what kind of Dak Prescott we're looking at in the offseason of 2022. So, wrap up another one real quick. The Packers, Aaron Rodgers, he's not going anywhere. He's going to stay in Green Bay. Once again, it's great media, it's great TV to talk about Rodgers leaving, but it's not realistic. He's still got 3 years left in Green Bay. Everybody loves him in Green Bay. He's a king in Green Bay. The fans love him. The city loves him. His teammates love him. He's going to play his entire career in that uniform. He's not going anywhere. So, that's all I got to say about that. Aaron Rodgers is staying in Green Bay. Lock it down. And then the last name on the list is Matthew Stafford, who might be the most interesting name out there. Now, in my opinion, there's only a couple of locations that could be legitimate options for Matthew Stafford. Location 1 is Indianapolis. The Colts have a great offense as far as the offensive line goes. They have a promising backfield with Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack, but I'm sure he's probably going to be let go if he hasn't already. And then they have a very solid defense. I think they're ranked top 3 this year. The only disparaging thing about the Colts is they don't have a receiving core. They might have one of the most lackluster receiving cores in the NFL because they're one of the only teams that doesn't have a bona fide number 1 target. That was T.Y. Hilton for a long time, but obviously Hilton being in, I think, his 13th year coming up, not his 13th year. I think he's in about his 10th or 11th year. Either way, he's in double-digit years, which is like 100 for a receiver if you ask the NFL. His production's slowing down. He's the only guy on the team that's worth a damn, so he's getting doubled on any play that's important. And, I think that would be the only thing if I'm Matthew Stafford and I'm a free agent, or if I'm, conducting the trade. It's the only thing that's going to make it very hard for me to want to go to Indianapolis is that, are you guys going to help me with wide receivers? Or help me with a tight end? Or help me with this or that? The other main option I could possibly see him going to would be New England. Now, New England is a very similar situation. Their defense is solid. They'll be getting back a lot of players that held out because of COVID. So, if their defense plays anything like it did in 2019, you're going to be looking at a hell of a defense. They're probably losing Stephon Gilmore, though. So, we'll see how the defense plays without the number 1 lockdown corner. But, the offense is where you have to be kind of scratching your head if you are Matthew Stafford. You have Julian Edelman, who's, I think he's going to be like 34 going into this year. He's a proven possession guy. He's going to run great routes. He's going to catch, 90 balls a year for you if you want him to. But he's, once again, not a number 1. They've kind of swung and missed on N'Keal Harry. He's proven that he's not really the guy they wanted in the first round, which is a shame because I had a lot of belief in N'Keal Harry myself personally. But, they swung and missed on N'Keal Harry. They have some other guys that stepped up this year when they had to, when they were asked to, like Myers and the white guy who does punt returns, whose name I can't remember right now. But, Olszewski, something like that. It's an O with a Y. But, they had some other options that stepped up this year, but that's a team that doesn't have a lot of offense. The thing that they have going for them in New England, though, is the fact that they have a lot of cap space going into next season. So not only can they make a move for Matthew Stafford, they may very well be able to make moves for some of these wide receivers that are going to get cut inevitably from some of these teams. And some of these tight ends are going to get cut from some of these teams. The Eagles are about to lose Zach Ertz for sure. They can go make a move for Zach Ertz. You know how well tight ends do in Bill's offense. And with the salary cap going down this year, there's definitely going to be a lot of teams that have to make very uncomfortable cuts and get rid of a lot of wide receivers that they normally wouldn't consider getting rid of. And so I think that if Stafford gets pulled into New England, we could see a situation where he's going to be pulling the strings and being in Bill's ear and trying to say, I'll come there if you want me, but you have to really make a push at getting this guy, or this guy. And we've seen, uncharacteristic of the Patriots over the last 20 years, but we've seen in recent memory them at least make an attempt, or at least tell the media they made an attempt at a guy. And, that was with Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins. So I think that's somewhere we could definitely see him go as well. And to be honest, I think that's where he will end up going. That is my pick for Stafford. And it's just another one of those things. you get the opportunity to play with, by a lot of people's accounts, the greatest head coach of all time, even though it's being questioned now. But, you get the chance to play with him. You get a chance to be on a franchise that has been known for success. Even though the Bills and the Dolphins are on the rise, that's a division that I think is still winnable, or at least a division that you can still make the playoffs out of. And I think that that's an offense that Stafford could fit well in. He's got a big arm, but he's also a very accurate guy. He's still got mobility to his name, and I think that he could really fit in there well and do a solid job. But that's about the end of this video, folks. I really thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for watching. This is only the 4th episode, so be prepared for many more. I plan on uploading another one here in about 2 days. That'll be episode 5. And then next week I might do another 2, being that it's an off week for football. So we'll see what happens along, with anything that might be as far as players, news, Watson, and coaches. I mean, most coaches have been done, so we're not really going to have much conversation about that. But whatever just might happen to happen in the NFL world, or maybe even other sports worlds if anything pops off. But I'm gonna try to put up another 2 videos. I'm hoping by the end of February to have at least 20 videos up by then, or at least 15, and really start to build a rapport with this and get used to it and start cranking these bitches out like nobody's business. But I do appreciate everybody for watching. Obviously, do the like, subscribe, and all that good shit. If there's a bell, which my nephew told me there was, if there's a bell, ring that thing. And, tell your friends. I mean, I know that I'm not a genius. I know I'm just up here saying stupid shit into a microphone. But, hey, if you agree with the stupid shit that's in this microphone, then I want to hear that. I want to hear whatever you have to say. And as I say in the other videos, comment below anything that you need to recommend, topics for the future. I mean, I am all over it. Obviously, I'm not an idiot. Obviously, I take my notes. Yeah. Obviously, I take my notes, and I know my shit about this stuff. I'm knowledgeable. I'm not just talking out of my ass. I mean, I am kind of, but I've got a little bit of stats to back it up. But this is something that I really want to continue doing. So, as I said, all that good YouTube thing shit they say, about the liking and all that, just do it and tell your friends. Let's try to get these views. Let's try to get these videos some more views. I want to try to start to get 20, 30 per video instead of 20, 30 every other one. And, baby steps, 50 views here, and then we'll get to 100, and then we'll get to 1 million. We'll just jump right under the pond. What the hell? We got to hit that algorithm. We got to bust through, and then I'll be everywhere. But, like I said, episode 4 is in the books. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you next time.